What if I told you the XRP price crash happening right now isn't a warning sign? It's the greatest red alert buying opportunity we may ever see before the biggest supply shock in the history of this asset hits the entire crypto market and blindsides millions of investors who are still asleep at the wheel, completely unaware of what's unfolding behind the curtain. Welcome back to the XRP Insider Network, the only channel where the noise gets stripped away, the truth gets amplified, and the real story behind XRP is exposed in a way nobody else dares to show you. So before we go any deeper into this explosive breakdown of why XRP's sudden price drop is not just a dip, but a ticking time bomb of upside potential, smash that like button, subscribe to the XRP Insider Network, turn on all notifications, and get ready, because what I am about to reveal will change the way you look at this asset forever. Serious about positioning yourself ahead of the biggest shift in monetary history? Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a single insider update. Because today's breakdown is one the algorithms absolutely do not want circulating. Now let's get into what makes this week different, because something happened in the last 72 hours that instantly changed the tone of institutional conversations around Ripple. Something that triggered a spike in private sector liquidity testing, something that caused several major banks in Europe and Asia to scramble their internal teams to prepare for what they're calling phase transition alpha. And no, they're not talking about testing or simulations, they're talking about deployment. The confirmation that quietly slipped out over the weekend is that the long-anticipated integration between Ripple's institutional liquidity hub and a new tier of cross-border settlement infrastructure has officially moved from internal validation to external readiness, which in plain English means the switch is about to flip. Banks don't prepare external readiness for systems they aren't about to launch. This is the kind of language they use right before activation. And what's wild is that Ripple didn't announce this publicly. Third-party service data flagged it. And right when that happened, correlated institutions started modifying their messaging queues, settlement windows, and liquidity routing models in real time, something they only do when a digital asset is about to be plugged directly into their transactional frameworks. But here's where things get insane. Several liquidity monitoring dashboards briefly showed anomalous routing patterns that strongly suggest XRP was already being used in limited corridors for pre-launch settlement flows, a step banks only take when testing is completed and they're shadow running the real system. Think of it like running a new financial highway underneath the existing one, invisible to the public until the day they decide to open it. And this is exactly the kind of pattern we saw in 2019 with the swift GPI updates before they deployed globally. Silent activity spikes, temporary routing anomalies, and small-scale test corridors running production-level data. XRP is showing almost the exact same pre-deployment signature right now. And here's where your mind is going to start racing, because this all aligns with a classified institutional timeline that insiders have been whispering about since early January, that the real global liquidity rollout wasn't going to be announced, it was going to be activated. And for the first time ever, all indicators, technical, institutional, regulatory, geopolitical, are syncing up, pointing to this being XRP's biggest week ever. But this runs much deeper than banks flipping switches. Liquidity providers tied to Ripple have started aggressively accumulating XRP off-exchange in OTC blocks, and the premiums they're paying are shockingly above current market levels, which usually signals two things. One, they expect demand to surge beyond available supply. And two, they expect restricted on-exchange liquidity as institutions begin routing through private channels. Remember, the public market is not where institutions settle. That's the side stage. The real show is off-exchange. And insiders are already calling this accumulation pattern a liquidity lock-in event, something seen before major monetary transitions, the kind that historically precede currency revaluations. But what triggered all of this now? Why this week? What changed? The answer is almost unbelievable because according to multiple cross-referenced leaks, Ripple received a green signal from a regulatory body far outside the US, a body that oversees multinational settlement standards, and that approval reportedly unlocked a cascading sequence of institutional go-aheads, many of which were waiting on a single compliance nod. In other words, one key turned the entire machine. And here's the kicker. Once that machine is active, XRP doesn't enter a normal market cycle. It enters what insiders are calling a structured liquidity appreciation phase, which means price isn't driven just by buyers and sellers, but by mathematically programmed liquidity demands from banks and settlement networks. This is where we inch into the territory everyone's terrified to talk about publicly. How high could XRP realistically go when the liquidity engine is firing at full scale? Could it hit triple digits? 4 digits? Is 1000 XRP actually on the table? If you're enjoying this breakdown so far, remember, your support helps this information reach more people. So hit that like button and drop a comment saying XRP liquidity engine activated to push this video deeper into the algorithm. Now let's continue, because the shocking part is that 1000 XRP isn't just a fantasy number when you understand the liquidity math. XRP isn't designed to act like a speculative crypto. It's engineered to function as the settlement core of a high-velocity, multi-trillion-dollar global network. In a system like that, price isn't about hype, it's about throughput. If XRP is truly about to handle portions of global settlement, then price becomes a reflection of how much value the system must move through the asset without breaking liquidity. And when you calculate that using the same models, SWIFT, IMF, and the BIS used for liquidity ratios, you get numbers that make the crypto world's $10 XRP is impossible crowd look hilariously unprepared. Because at a global scale, even a fraction of it, 4-digit pricing isn't just plausible, it becomes necessary for functionality. But here's the part no one expects. XRP's design already anticipates this. Its supply distribution, escrow structure, and velocity ratios match the exact profile BIS researchers described in 2022 when outlining assets intended for large-scale settlement operations. Think about that. XRP's architecture matches the blueprint of the next financial system before the world even acknowledges that system exists. And if that's true, then what's happening this week isn't random. It's the first visible tremor of a seismic shift planned years in advance. And we're not done yet, because what's happening behind the scenes with governments is even more explosive. Several national payment systems have begun synchronizing with a new messaging standard that directly aligns with RippleNet's data pathways, and one central bank, whose name I won't say here because the source could be exposed, has reportedly begun loading digital settlement tables that include an XRP transport layer. Not future tense, present tense. And alongside that, one government in the Asia-Pacific region quietly updated language in its financial modernization bill to include digital asset-based settlement for high-value cross-border transactions. This is the exact kind of legal framework required before a country can plug into a Ripple settlement architecture. Everything is lining up at the exact same time, and institutions don't coordinate timing like this unless the move is global, choreographed, and imminent. But the wildest part is still coming, because all signs point to Ripple preparing to announce something massive right after the internal launch window closes. Something that would validate everything we're discussing here. Something that could instantly reprice XRP across the entire market. And if that announcement matches what insiders are hinting at, then XRP won't just be another digital asset. It will become the institutional settlement backbone of a new financial age, and the market will have no choice but to adjust XRP's price upward to meet the liquidity requirements of the system adopting it. This is why some insiders are calling this XRP's biggest week ever, because the launch window has reportedly opened, institutions are aligning their infrastructure, and liquidity patterns are signaling activation rather than speculation. But here's the twist that nobody is ready for. The public XRP price we see on exchanges is almost irrelevant to institutions during this phase, because they operate on private liquidity rails, where prices adjust differently based on settlement value, not market emotion. This means the true functional price of XRP could diverge dramatically from its exchange price during rollout. Historically, when financial systems transition like this, whether it was the move to digital forex settlements, the adoption of Swift GPI, or even the introduction of sovereign electronic settlement layers, the public markets lag behind institutional valuation until a critical threshold is reached. And the patterns we're seeing now suggest XRP may be entering this divergence window. That is exactly how you get sudden, violent price revaluations, not because retail pumps it, but because institutional liquidity pressure forces the market to catch up. And when that moment hits, it won't be gradual, it will be instantaneous. Ask yourself this: why would banks accumulate OTC XRP at higher than market prices unless they expected the functional price to be much higher soon? Why would multiple countries align their regulatory frameworks within the same 90-day window? Why would routing anomalies appear exactly when internal readiness logs go green? None of this is coincidence. It is coordinated, it is intentional, and it is happening now. But let's go deeper into the $1,000 XRP possibility, because this is the part mainstream crypto refuses to engage with, not because the math is bad, but because the implications are too disruptive. If XRP is integrated into even a small percentage of cross-border settlements, just 2% of global flows, the liquidity requirement model puts XRP's optimal functional price somewhere between $200 and $350. At 10% global settlement penetration, something that becomes realistic once multiple major banks adopt RippleNet, the functional price pushes into the $800 to $1,200 range. And if XRP becomes a primary settlement bridge for high-value transactions between central banks or major institutions, the required liquidity density skyrockets, making four-digit pricing not only plausible, but operationally necessary. Think of XRP like the oil running through the pipes of global finance. The more the system depends on it, the higher the value must be for the system not to break. This is why insiders aren't laughing at the 1,000 XRP conversation anymore. They're calculating it. And the numbers match the narrative unfolding in real time. But the biggest confirmation of all didn't come from Ripple, or the banks, or governments. It came from the market structure itself. Over the last week, XRP's liquidity corridors have shown a tightening effect that historically precedes major asset revaluations. Liquidity tightening means the system is preparing for higher flow volume by restricting unnecessary volatility. It's the same pattern seen right before gold revalued in the 1970s, before the euro stabilized pre-launch, and before major forex pairs underwent structural repricing during digitalization. XRP is exhibiting the same pre-revaluation tightening right now. That alone should terrify anyone who dismissed XRP as dead. But this next part is even bigger. Several institutional liquidity engines have begun running value density tests on synthetic XRP flows, a process used to ensure that settlement assets can handle volume under increased price pressure. This only happens when the expectation is that the asset will soon operate at a much higher valuation. Institutions don't run value density simulations for fun. They run them when the system is about to change. And the timing of these simulations lines up perfectly with the internal launch window that insiders claim has already opened. We are watching a global machine shift into motion, one piece at a time, and XRP sits at the center of it. And here's something you must internalize. None of this is retail-driven. Retail investors are spectators to a transition far bigger than price charts. The price charts will move, but only once the institutional switch flips. And the fact that the switch might be flipping this week explains why insiders are framing this moment as unprecedented, historic, and irreversible. Once the liquidity engine activates publicly, XRP will become a different asset entirely, not a speculative token, but a settlement instrument with mathematical value constraints that naturally push its price into higher ranges to support global throughput. And when that happens, the window of accumulation will slam shut instantly. This is why those OTC buys are happening off exchange. This is why institutions are preparing silently. This is why governments are updating frameworks without announcing the changes, because they know what's coming. And they know it must happen quickly to avoid market disruption. If you're still here with me, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the XRP Insider Network, because what comes next is critical for every XRP holder who wants to understand what a true global liquidity reset means for their investment. Now here's the final revelation that ties everything together. Ripple is rumored to be preparing a global announcement related to institutional settlement infrastructure that may confirm that the system's first phase is active. If that announcement contains even one of the insider hinted keywords, liquidity expansion, phase deployment, institutional rollout, regulatory clearance, or production settlement, then the entire market will realize, almost overnight, that they severely underestimated XRP's role in the emerging financial world. And when that realization hits, the price won't just rise, it will reset. Because XRP is not meant to live in the speculative crypto bucket forever. It was engineered to evolve into the backbone of a liquidity-driven architecture that replaces the outdated correspondent banking model. And when phase one of that system goes active, and it appears that moment may be unfolding right now, the price must adapt to the system, not the other way around. That's why insiders are whispering about this week. That's why liquidity anomalies are popping up. That's why regulatory frameworks are sinking. That's why institutions are accumulating. And that's why the crypto world has no idea that XRP may be entering the most transformative moment in its history. A moment that could propel it toward valuations people once thought were impossible. XRP's biggest week ever may not be a prediction. It may be a confirmation of a plan years in the making. And if this launch window fully activates, the question won't be whether XRP can hit $1,000. The question will be, how fast?